Hello, beautiful visionaries. This is Lorna Liana, and today I'm really happy to bring to you Peter Gorman, who is an award-winning investigative journalist and a longtime explorer of northwestern Amazonia. Artifact collector for the American Museum of Natural History, medicinal plant collector for Shaman Pharmaceuticals, Peter's the first person to have published a written account of the use of sapo, the Amazonian frog medicine now also known as Kambô. He will share with us his forays into the Amazon and what it takes to do the work that he does, how the Matsés tribe use this frog poison and its potential as a therapy in Western medicine. Thank you so much for joining us today, Peter.
Thank you very much, Lauren.
I would love to hear a little bit about your journey. What inspired you to go into the Amazon and really journey deep into the jungle to spend time with these remote tribes? Because you know what? It ain't easy and a lot of people can't handle it. So I'd love to hear what connected you with the Matsés and then the frog medicine and, you know, how you feel about its expansion into the world now.
Do you want that all at once, or would you like me to break it up over the course of the next several weeks? I lived with a woman, and I loved hitchhiking around the country, and I fell in love with Mexico and the jungle in southern Mexico. And then I fell in love with India, and I fell in love with the jungle, the scrub jungle of southern India. And she knew the next place I was going to go was the Amazon. So she bought me a book, which she said was going to detract me from going, or, disturb me enough that I wouldn't go to the Amazon. Secretly, I know she bought it because she loved me and knew I needed the book. It was called, it was written by a fellow named Updegraff, and it was called Headhunters of the Amazon. He went to school in Buffalo, New York in about 1895, and he had a friend from Ecuador who went to school up there with him, who invited him down to see his father's place. His father was a gold miner down in Ecuador. They went. There was an indigenous uprising. Everybody was being slaughtered. His father evidently was not a nice man. And so Updegraff and his friend had the choice of either going down to the mountains to the sea, to the Pacific, and being killed, or diving down to the Amazon and hoping to make it out alive. Well, they got separated, and Updegraff spent 6 years trying to get out of the Amazon, most of it spent on the Yavari River, which is the border between Brazil and Peru. When I read the book, then I knew that's where I had to go. But to get to the Yavari, the nearest jumping off point at the time, 1984, was Iquitos, Peru. Mm-hmm. And Iquitos, Peru was only 4 days, 5 days by boat at that time down to Leticia, where you could, in theory, head up the Yavari. Well, it actually, that's how I decided to go there. And on the first trip down, I went with a couple of friends, and we explored a lot of Peru, like a lot of people do. We spent a week here, a week there, and finally it was time to go to the Amazon, and we ended up spending about 3 weeks in the Amazon. And there was a smarmy little guy named Moises Torres Viena, who approached us at the airport when we got out in Iquitos and said, I'm a great guide. I'm the only jungle guide. I'll take you to the jungle. You guys look like rough and tumble. I'm sure you want to go, so you got to hire me. And I was so fed up with Peruvian guides by that point. We'd had 5 weeks of them already. I was like, get out of here. And so I told my friend Larry, I said, Larry, you speak enough Spanish. We'll find a boat. There's got to be a river here. It's called the Amazon for a reason. Got to be boats on the river. We'll find a boat. We'll go someplace. And when we get there, we'll go in the jungle. Well, we did find a boat. It took us to a place called Requena on the Ucayali River. And there was nobody to take us in the jungle. They were all terrified. They were terrified by a group called the Mayaruna Indians, or the Matsés, who had raided them as recently as 1972, just 12 years earlier, and stolen a bunch of women and tools and shotguns. They were terrified of jaguars. They were terrified of ghosts. No one in Requena would go anywhere near the jungle. Their fields went back about half a kilometer beyond the town, and that was as far as they were going. Unfortunately, it was very low rain season, and so no boats came back to get us for 11 days. So we were stuck there for 11 days. And We got off the first boat that we were able to get on, and who was waiting for us but Moises Torres Vienna, saying, "Now are you ready to go to the jungle?" And we said, "We just were at the jungle." He said, "No, you were not at the jungle. They're terrified of those Indians out there. They're terrified of jaguars. They're terrified of ghosts. Nobody took you to the jungle out there, I guarantee it." And so we went with him. And he turned out to be an incredible guide. He had been, it turned out, because he was mestizo, he couldn't be in the military as an officer. So he was a sergeant, but his specialty was jungle survival. He taught American troops. He taught French troops. He taught a lot, international groups would come down there to spend a week or two with Moises to learn how to survive in the jungle, if it ever came to that. And he also taught Peruvian troops. And then when he retired, he took knuckleheads like me out to the woods. I fell in love with the guy against my better judgment. And it was, he'd only take us out a few days the first time. And I really wanted more. So I hired him 6 months later to take me out for 30 days survival course. In the course of that, we ran into the people that were called Mayaruna, but are now called Matsés, who had just moved to the Okayaku and started a camp. And the camp was not at all ready yet. So there was very low houses, 3-foot-high houses, just temporary shelter until they could build a camp. What was extraordinary was we were a 3 or 4 days walk into the jungle. Moises was teaching me how to build a different house. So every night I would build a house, and then he would tear it down. And then I would have to build another house so that I would learn house building techniques. And one day, a fellow, tattooed face, spines coming out, thin spines coming out of his nose, looked like a jaguar, tattoo around his mouth, came up. He had straps around his chest, and came up, looked at our shotgun, kind of nodded at it. And Moises nodded okay, took out 2 shotgun shells, gave them to the guy. The kid walks off with the shotgun. I said, "Moises." He just walked off with a shotgun. He said, "I know these people. I fought them. Don't worry." 20 minutes later, we hear a bang. 20 minutes later, we hear another bang. 20 minutes later, in comes this kid. He's made 2 baskets, and they're on tump lines from his head, one in the front and one in the back, with very large mono negros, large black monkeys. And then he's got a baby monkey on his head. So he killed a mother, a father, and a baby. Or it could have been his mother and a sister and a baby. But he takes off one tump line, he puts the monkey down, not quite dead yet, next to the tree, next to the shotgun, and walks off. And Moises said, "Peter, I know what you want to see. You better come. Let's follow." And we followed, and we walked, a couple of hours until we came to the start of this village. And the village had posts around it, and the posts had animal heads on them as kind of warnings, like, "Don't come in here. We eat, kill things." We went in there, and the first thing we saw, we were behind the kid by probably 30 seconds. The kid gave the one monkey in the basket on the tump line on his back to 2 women who had a fire going. They evidently had heard the shots, and they knew what that meant. And they stretched this living monkey out over the fire and continued their conversation. And this poor monkey was screaming as it's being burned to death. And the women had no concern for it at all. It was probably the cruelest thing I'd ever seen, and almost puked. Then the kid takes this monkey off his head, gives it to a woman who's breastfeeding a baby, and without hesitation, she slapped it on her other breast to start breastfeeding it, which was the kindest thing I'd ever seen. And between the cruelest and kindest things I'd ever seen in 10 seconds by the same people, I knew I was going to have to spend some time with them because they just blew my mind. And so when you ask, how did you end up there? I ended up there because somebody sent me a boat to keep me away. Then I discovered that that's where these people live. Only this small family had moved to this river. And so if I wanted to see the rest of them, I'd have to go out to the Yavari, which was, where up to Graf had gotten lost for 6 years. And so it all made perfect sense in my mind. And after seeing them that first time, I said, Moises, I got to go out and see these people, whoever they are. I mean, if they're putting monkeys on their breasts and they're burning alive monkeys and several other things happened that just blew my mind. It was like, are you kidding? There's still this going on now in 1984. I thought this all ended in 1800. And so the following year, I took a plane out with him, and we took a floater plane, landed in the river, and went up the river and met several of the villagers and met a man who became a good friend of mine, Pablo, who introduced me to sapo. And kind of amusingly, after that was my third trip with Moises, I got a couple of things, throwaway things, like arrows that were used to kill monkeys, and then the monkey would pull the arrow out and it would break, and I would collect that. And I brought this bunch of junk home, and I thought, well, is Moises fooling me? Am I spending like $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on a trip for 30, 40 days? And these are just like tourist Indians that put on a good show? And I wondered, how do I figure that out? Am I just being played here or what? But I'm a New York kid, and so I'm smart. And it took me about 3 months to figure out, I know what you do. You bring this over to the American Museum of Natural History 3 blocks away, and you say you have a gift to give them from the Indians. And if they laugh at you when they see the stuff, you know you're being played. If they say, cool stuff, we don't need it, but cool stuff, you know you're not being played. It took about a month to get an appointment with Bob Carnero, the head of South American ethnology, and his assistant, Lila Williamson. Finally got one and walked 3, 4 blocks over to the museum from my house and from my apartment, and went inside, and I was totally tremblingly nervous. I'm just going to be laughed at here. I know I'm just going to be laughed at. You're an idiot, Gorman. This is stupid. Instead, they said, holy mackerel, where'd you get this stuff? This is Matsés material. Nobody's got that. They kill everybody. How'd you get this stuff? And so, can we have it? Can you have it? Yeah, we're putting together a new hall of South American peoples. It'll be on permanent collection forever until there's something that happens and the museum is destroyed. And I was like, okay, you can have it. But you got to give me a letter that says I gave it to you and I put stuff in the permanent collection. And when I go next time, you got to give me a letter asking me for something. So I have a purpose to go back there. And they did. And that's how I became a collector for them. But it's also how I discovered that there really was not a whole lot of contact with this group yet. Steve Romanoff had worked with them for 6 months, and Sullivan Language Institute had worked with one of the camps. But some of the camps were still kind of pretty out there. And it was my joy. It turned out to be one of the joys of my life to get to work with them, not change them, not fix them. They weren't broken. Just watch them work and watch the magic they did in the jungle. So I don't know if I even answered the beginning of your question, but that's how I ended up down there and why I was intrigued enough to keep going back.
That's completely riveting, the story. I have so many questions, and I do want to stay with kind of like the general, framework of our conversation. But I do want to ask you, do they speak Spanish at all? How did you communicate with them?
Yes, now this was amusing. Pablo spoke a little Spanish. All the men spoke a little. I spoke just a little. I didn't speak very much. They didn't speak any English. It was mostly, and this is going to be embarrassing, hand signals and telepathy. I mean, by telepathy, I mean the 2 men in the camp, it was just Pablo and Alberto, and then sons and daughters, and Pablo had 4 wives and Alberto had 2. So the 2 men in the camp and the older sons, we would sit down and no one would say a word, but we would all laugh at the punchline. And we all laughed at the same time. We all heard the same joke, but nobody said anything. And then it was my turn to tell a joke, and I'd tell a joke, and they'd all laugh. It was like, is this going on or what? And amusingly, the people at the museum, by the time they asked me the same question, how are you getting so much information because they wanted lots of information about anything I brought back to them, where it came from, who gave it to me, how I acquired it, did I pay for it, did I find it, what camp did it come from, where was that camp located in relation to other camps, etc. So they'd have the right information. And when they got to that question, I said, just basically what I told you, I don't know, but we seem to be communicating just fine. It's just like we sit there. Well, 2 or 3 years later in 1990, a book came out called Amazon Beating. And it was about the experience of Lauren McIntyre, who had been abducted by the Matsés, or Mayaruna, in maybe 79 or something. But he didn't write the book and didn't publish anything about it. Someone else actually wrote his book for him. Maybe wrote the book about his experience with them. He spent a month with them. And it became a Broadway show. And anyway, the book was called Amazon Beaming. And in the book, he talked extensively about just communicating telepathically with these guys, that it was uncanny. And Lila and Williamson and Bob Carnero called me into the museum when the book came out and said, Peter, we have to talk to you. I said, what did I do? Like I did something wrong? You're going to throw all my stuff out of the permanent collection or what? Like, no, everything you always told us was quite true and honest, and your reports were very well done. But we always thought you lied. You just made up the part about telepathy. And we just read Lauren McIntyre's book, and we're sorry. Because that's the whole book is about. That's how you speak to them. You just shut up and listen. And that's what you described to us. So how do we communicate? A little bit of Italian hand signals from my Irish self, and a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of just, I don't know, just seemed to make sense talking to them. They weren't involved conversations. They weren't politics, but it was pretty basic stuff. You know, are you hungry? Did we eat? You know, and you found out that their language at the time had no past or future tense, only present. Mm-hmm. It now has past and future, but it didn't. Because if you're hungry, it's time to hunt. So there's a word called hunt. If you're eating, it was a good hunt. So there's a word called hunt, you know. And if you're starving, darn well better be time to go hunt. Get out of here and go hunt. So you didn't really need a whole lot of past, present, blue perfect.
Did you eventually learn their language?
Right. Never to communicate fully. I learned a couple of hundred words, and I could still make 4 or 5 jokes with them, say hello, and, you know, I'm going to tell you what a noose is if you're going to kill a wild boar, and say, teniste, you know, you know, it's kind of guttural, you know, it's a lot of exclamation points at the end of words. But I never spent enough time consecutively to really become an expert in the language, no.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. One of the conversations that I see happening in the online world about, you know, spending time with the indigenous people is this whole idea that the indigenous will just share their, you know, things with you and give you medicine and do all these things. And, you know, one of the big questions comes up is, well, how cool is that for a Westerner who can, you know, afford an international plane ticket to go and show up there and expect this village to just take care of you and, you know, provide for you and, you know, make sure that you don't die and, you know, entertain you. And so when I was traveling in the Brazilian Amazon and going into the indigenous territories, the anthropologists that I met there, they're just like, you just can't show up there. First of all, you have to have an invitation because Funai is not even going to give you permission. Like, you could apply, and then after 30 days, you'll probably say, get a rejection letter. So, you know, you have to have an invitation. They have to be expecting you. You have to provision your boats, find your gasoline, you know, get your boat, you know, drivers, and it's usually 2 people, the one that steers and the one that, you know, like kind of like makes sure that, you know, it's moving in the right direction. in the front and in the back, and then you fill your canoe with provisions, which you give to the community, and just make sure that your presence actually is a net positive. So when you were staying there, what was the exchange for you to be there, and how did you work that out?
Moises was real clear. The thing that the Matsés loved the most was chakira. Chakira are small glass seed beads made in Czechoslovakia. They're only made in Czechoslovakia. Someone 400 years ago must have brought those in, and indigenous all throughout Amazonia love them. You've seen the strands around people's necks and around their belts. Now, they run about $70. They used to run about $70 a kilo in Manhattan. If you get cheap and buy the Japanese plastic version, Indians just throw them away. You're not invited in camp at all. So I had to bring enough. And Moises taught me early on, no, Peter, you don't give a kilo to the chief and he's going to give it away to his friend. No. If you give him a kilo, he's going to keep the whole kilo. His wives won't get any. Buy hundreds of bags, and we put a few in each bag, enough for one necklace maybe. And every day we're here, we give it a new bag to every person in the village. And once people from neighboring villages know we have them, today might be only 20 people in the village. Tomorrow there might be 200. So we have to have hundreds of bags. The day we run out, we have to leave this village. So you can't stay here. When you have no gifts, you have no purpose to be here. And to make matters complicated, although it was mostly a matter of show, when year Pecky would come up on the village, you went to the far side. The village was always on top of a hill, right? Because of the flooding of. So you'd go to the far side, as far away as you could, because everybody with a bow and arrow or a shotgun is going to come down and shoot at you. They don't want you there. They're just going to start shooting guns and shooting arrows at you. And so you had to be far enough away that you could stand up by the boat and say, shoot me. I'm freaking God. Go ahead.
So what does it take to build trust with the Indians so that they will actually share their knowledge and even their medicine with you?
I think in my case, it was easy because Moises Torres Viana brought me out there. And after the big raid in 1972, the last big raid, by the Matsés, Moises was part of the ground troops of the Peruvian military that went there to kill them all. And he ended up confronting this fellow Pablo, and he said, Peter, I just never saw anybody that brave. I'm standing there with my automatic weapon, and I'm shooting the ground an inch in front of him, and he's shooting arrows an inch in front of my feet, just letting me know I can kill you too. So they became fast friends. And so I had that in. Some of the camps were more friendly. Some of the camps were less friendly. They all would let us in because they all knew Moises, and they all knew that I was bringing presents. But the limit was a day or 2 days at a camp. It was like after that, you smell like fish, get out of here. And but if there's 8 camps on the river, you could do 3 days at each camp. It's 24 days coming up and 24 days going back. So you ended up getting quite a bit of time altogether. Trust was certainly built up by, certainly over the years, when somebody got hurt. And at one point, somebody got a bad open cut from an axe wound. And I had penicillin powder to put on the wound directly. And then I had the needle sew them up, and so I sewed them up. And I did it fairly painlessly. I actually put some codeine in there with the penicillin, so the codeine kind of acted like an analgesic. And they liked that. They didn't want anything for it. They're like, well, what do you get for that? Blah, 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 like the doctor. And I was like, oh, he was bleeding. I stopped the bleeding. I mean, I hope you do the same. There was always a sense that you had to sleep with one eye open a little bit. There was always somebody, not in Pablo's camp with Pablo and Alberto, but all the other camps, there was 1 or 2 people who just didn't like you. They were going to steal all your stuff, or they were going to eat you. Or, that's what it felt like. They looked at you like lunch. I'm not saying they would do that, but they looked at you like lunch. Just didn't recognize you as human. And so you had kind of slept with one eye open. There wasn't full trust. with Pablo and Alberto being the exception. They were just, Pablo had a great sense of humor. He had this immense visionary quality. He once, with his toes, after a rain in the mud, he painted several of the tenements on my corner of my building where I lived. And then he painted me and Chepa and the boys in the right window where we lived. And so he'd never seen a picture of our buildings, and he'd never probably seen a picture of New York. So he didn't know what a tenement would have looked like, or a row of tenements, much less that we were in the second building on the third floor on the right-hand side. And there he's drawing us, just with his toes, and he's laughing and saying, he's pointing to his house, casa, casa, house. He's like, yeah, that's my house. How the frick did you know what my house frickin' looked like? Just close my eyes. I was at your house. And the answer is, yep. And now I know, of course, that's not a hard trick to do. With the medicines they were using to be able to, do some emotional or mental transportation, fairly standard for the business. But at the time, it was like, are you kidding? You've seen my house. You've seen us in the window. And you painted us in the window of a house in a city you've never seen, in a type of building structure you've never witnessed. And you got us in the right window. Are you out of your mind? He had a tremendous sense of humor and endlessly fascinating. Everything he did, he understood the jungle like no one I ever knew before, and no one I've ever met since. He seemed to be at ease and friends with every animal, every bug, every tree, every little bit of moss. It just seemed to be like smile at him when he walked through the jungle. I don't know. It sounds ridiculous. I was tremendously in love with that man. Just in my heart,
Mm-hmm. What kind of medicines were they using that would allow them to enhance their cognitive abilities?
I would think Nunu, their snuff, was probably the primary one for that. Nunu is a snuff made of the inner bark, toasted, roasted, and smashed inner bark of the cacao tree, mixed with tobacco ash. Mm-hmm. And people call it rapé, mm-hmm. but very few people making rapé, the Brazilian word for it, make it just that simply. And that's pretty much until very recently, the only way the Matsés would ever make that. And it was very visionary if you took enough of it. Mm. It means when I see people it's blown with a tube from one person to another. Mm-hmm. And usually it's a great hunter blowing it into your nose, because he's not just blowing the medicine, he's blowing his spirit as well. Mm-hmm. So that enhances the medicine. If a lousy hunter blows, you're not going to hunt very well. But I see, or even if I serve people here once in a while, somebody wants to check it out at their house, two snoots, two toots up each nostril, they're like, that's enough. And the Matsés might do 25 and 25, in each nostril. Like
at one go?
Yeah, and then wait 20 minutes, and then do that again. Wait 20 minutes, do that again. It might be several hundred over the course of a night. And until they were so completely drunk from it, so completely analgesic from the cacao, and the buzz from the tobacco combined, so they were like, it was like a speedball, like an 8-ball, where they're getting a little speed and they're getting a little heroin, so they're getting both ends of it, and they were like completely ripped out of their minds, telling great stories the higher they got. But they also then could see into the future. They could also travel anywhere they wanted. They could also, at some stage it becomes extremely visionary. And when I hear gringos talk about all the rapé and snuffs that they use and this and that, they don't talk about that, because I don't think any of them would have done enough to maybe get to that point. And when I say enough, I'm talking about, 50 times more than you would call a big dose. Mm-hmm. Just an endless dose. I mean, just endless, as if you could just make it and make more and make more and make more. They also, the second medicine that they used that was, out of the ordinary was sapo. And that was an extraordinary medicine. And now, heck, I mean, thousands and thousands of people are serving sapo, kambo, frog sweat medicine, for a myriad of physical issues. And I don't know how much of that is made up. How much of those just, people saying, well, it worked for this, it worked for this. I can cure this with this. I'm always mystified. Well, you can cure? Wow, you're pretty good, man. You get to cure stuff. I just get to work with it. I hope it, sets somebody on the right path to maybe being able to get better. But, it's hard for me to say I'm going to cure. Anyway, but you wanted to reach sapo, and we finally have reached sapo kambo. So ask away.
Yeah. So, what is it like to do kambo or sapo with the Matsés? How do they use it, and what was your experience like with them?
Well, the first experience was extraordinary. It was a kind of a rainy day. My brother-in-law was with me, but my brother-in-law had gone with Alberto to fish somewhere. So I was alone with Pablo and two of his wives, Marta and Mashu, and we're sitting in one of the wives. Each woman had her own house. So we're sitting in one of the houses, and I had my notebook out, and I was pointing at things. What do you call that? What do you call that? And they would tell me the word, and I would write it phonetically, trying to make a little dictionary, and learn a few words. And I already knew from prior experience in the jungle that that anything hanging over the fire would be a medicine. And that way the medicine wouldn't get mold on it. Sometimes it'd be liquid, sometimes dry, but it would be hanging far enough off the fire to not burn, but close enough to stay warm so cockroaches and bugs wouldn't get at it, and it wouldn't ferment, it wouldn't, So I decided, let's point at the medicines. And almost instantly, Pablo surprised me by taking down the medicines, takes one out, spits on it, takes a little stick, starts scraping, makes a little goop, look like wasabi or something like wasabi, takes another stick from the fire, grabs my forearm, starts burning me, and then takes the wasabi, puts it in there, sapo, 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 sapo. And then 10 seconds, 15 seconds later, I start to warm up, and I start to get hot, and I start like, oh my God, what's going on? I got to sit down. I can't sit down. I got to lie down. I don't know. I had no idea what it was. I turned to Moises. I said, Moises, what is this? What did they just do to me? And he said, I have no idea. Never seen it before. And I basically got down on all fours and fell on my side. And, I threw up a little. I pooped myself a little. I'm sure I peed my pants. All the little kids were running around, like kicking me, like as if, is he dead yet? Can we start cooking him? That's what it felt like to me. I knew I was dying. I mean, I'd just been poisoned. I didn't know why. Why did they do this? Why did Moises let them just kill me? I mean, I couldn't. And then I blacked out. And then, my heart was racing. I just knew I was going to explode. My heart was going to explode. And I woke up. I don't know. It turned out to be 2 hours later, an hour and a half later. But at the time, I had no idea. But I was back in the hut that Steve and I were using. It was an unwalled hut. The roof wasn't even finished on it. And I got out of the hammock. I didn't know how I got into the hammock. How did I get there from where I was? And I was sitting there thinking, or standing there thinking, and then I heard two people talking right next to me. So I turned around like there's nobody there. But Masha and Martha were talking across the entire camp. Would have been maybe 25 yards. And I heard them clear as a bell. And then I heard something up in the trees, and I looked up, and there was a band of monkeys, not right at the front of the trees, but in the trees. And I was seeing those monkeys in the trees where I normally would have just seen a wall of green, and I was hearing them. I would never have seen or heard those. And I realized, my goodness, what's going on with my ears? What's going on with my eyesight? Then I suddenly realized, what the heck's going on with me? I felt like Superman. I just felt like Superman. I was like, what's going on? And it turned out what everybody knows, sapo cleans you up, cleans you out, and or kambo, and temporarily gives you these extraordinary abilities, or just a little bit extra ability for things like hearing, for sight, for taste. That for a hunter are immensely important. So you ask, what do the Matsés use it for? Matsés use it primarily for hunting. In that if a Matsés is off by half an inch, nobody eats. You really got to kill the monkey. You can't just get near the monkey. You don't get points for being close. And so if your hand is not steady, if for some odd reason you're not paying attention and making your arrows perfectly enough, and that they're swerving a little bit, you would use sapo to clean that up. Just refocus your body. If somebody had the grippe, would be pretty much kind of a common cold or the flu, but they have no protection against it still, so they're liable to die from that. So if someone has the grippe, you put sapo on them, even if they're smallish, and let them burst a fever, then to get rid of that. If a woman is pregnant, they would use it to find out if she's pregnant, who the father is, and later on whether it's a healthy fetus or not, whether it's male or female, and then finally, if they need to abort, to use it as an abortive.
How do they figure out who the father is? Is it a telepathic thing?
No. It's the one non-scientific part of the whole formula, which is that when you give the woman the sapo against her will, she's going to be crawling on the floor in pain, and she's going to tend to crawl to the person she's in love with. And if that's not her husband, you know who the father is.
Oh, that's terrible. They do that to a woman without her consent. Like, come here.
Well, if there's a question. If you're the third or fourth wife, you might be fooling around. The number one wife probably wouldn't, but the third or fourth might. And that's still a culture where when they were still with very few fields and mostly hunting and gathering, you need a few wives for each husband. Because one hunter can go out and hunt for everybody, but he needs somebody to help carry the meat back. But then who's watching the kids? Who's watching the camp? Who's out gathering food to go with that meat that he's going to bring back? So you need partners there. So multiple wives work, and usually they're sisters and stuff, so cousins. So it worked out pretty well.
But it can't work the other way around, where the woman could have multiple husbands or multiple lovers, or that's just no.
The fact is, yes, they'll go ahead and make love with whoever they want to. I mean, it's not acceptable, but everybody turns a blind eye to it. But that's why you would use the sapo to find out who the father is. Because it might be a given that she's going to be screwing somebody else. If she's the fourth wife and she's only getting it, once every 3 weeks, or not at all, she's just like expected to pick up after the kids, and that's her job. And, then somebody who actually might like her, she might have an affair with. It's pretty open that way. I never, ever took advantage of it because I thought I have no business, doing this. But it was certainly on offer on a regular basis. Hey, it's cold night, so 3 people are going to crawl in your hammock with you. I'll just be cold. I'll be cold. But I don't think it wasn't, we're pretty puritanical in here in the United States. Most of the world is not nearly as puritanical as us with, oh, you slept with somebody else, but you're married to him? Of course, why not? I mean, I'm puritanical too, so I'll tell. The Matsés would also use it one extraordinary way, which was certain times of the year, the only thing you can do is trap animals. The river is too low, so too much of the bank is exposed for animals to go down and drink water at night, because predators will have enough time to catch them. So the animals retreat way deep in the forest to copes, temporary areas, little temporary lakes where there's still a little water left, or depression in the ground where there's moisture. And during that period, it's called trapping time, the Matsés will go out and set a trap out there looking for a tapir. Tapir is the biggest land animal down there. And they'll set this beautiful trap between two trees, make a muddy mess over here that the tapir will like to scoot around in, and, stretch, put a sapling between two saplings, tie it up there, stretch it across, put a spike on it, so whoever walks through this is going to trip a line, is going to spike them in the heart. Well, during tapping time, you use sapo, or at least when I saw it used, this is how it was done. I'm not going to say this is how everybody does, this is how I saw it done. Pablo did 5 burns in the morning, 5 in the evening, 5 in the morning, 5 in the evening, and I forget if it was 3 days or 5 days. I think it was 5 days in a row of that, which was an enormous amount of pain that he went through. But that gave him the strength to project his animus, his spirit, into that trap where he sent his spirit looking like a female tapir. So that tapir was going to lure a male tapir into the trap. Okay? The male was not going to go in that trap if it didn't see female. So he had to become a female and send his spirit out to become a female. Now, during the same time of trapping, you can't hunt any other animals. Because if you do, those animals, when they die, are going to tell the male tapir, don't, it's a trap. That's just a fake tapir. That's not a real woman tapir. That's the guy who killed me is going to kill you too. Okay, this is the story, okay? There are 2 exceptions to that rule. One is the river turtle, and there's 2 big river turtles down there. Doesn't matter, Tarakaya and the Charapita. Those turtles you can kill during trapping time because they're so aloof. They would never deem to talk to any other animals, even if you kill them. They're just above that. Secondly, you can kill sloths. Because while sloths are the biggest snitches in the whole jungle universe, they're so slow that by the time they get the story out, the whole season for trapping is done. So the sapo, the time that I was with Pablo when we did the trap, we set the trap, then Pablo used Nunu and saw that there were a couple of sloths up the river 2 days away. We go up the river 2 days away to Old Remo Jacobo in Peru, and there's sloths on the tree that he described just outside the thing, so he takes one down, and we stay in Peru. It had been abandoned. We stayed there that night, and in the morning, or the next night maybe, Pablo does Nunu again, and suddenly sees the trap's going to be sprung. So we have to get hurriedly back in the boat and paddle all night to get back to his camp. And he's impatient as hell when we get back to his camp, like stepping his foot. Come on, Peter, come on. And so we hurry out of camp and we walk the 40 minutes or so to where the trap was set. And probably about 10 minutes away from where the trap was set, we hear the trap go off. We hear the animal scream. And then we chase the animal. I mean, the women chased the animal until they caught it, and it was still living, and they killed it and cut it up and dragged it home. And so it was like, wait a minute. You used your medicine to put your spirit out in a trap that lured another animal into the trap. You were a day away by boat when you saw the trap was going to be sprung the next morning, and you were impatient because you didn't want us to be late for the springing of the trap because other animals might get to the meat before you do. Interesting. When I tell you they were magic, they were magic. They were just, to imagine being around this, how lucky I was. And, just year after year for several years to be able to get more of this and more of this. And every time you think, well, I've seen everything they can do, they do something else. When it came to sapo, when I wrote about it, I had no idea that no one else had written about it. And I had some people call me, write and call angrily anthropologists who had done it before me. But since they were anthropologists, they weren't allowed to write about it. So they were like, well, I was going to wait till I retired and then I could write about it. I was like, I'm a journalist. My job is to write about it. I'm sorry, I don't wait 30 years. My job is just write about it. And then the museum didn't quite believe me, so I had to bring one back, and then I had to bring the stick back, and then, Vittorio Sparmer got it. And so He was the scientist who had worked on the Phylomedusa bicolor and peptides in frog skins, but without knowing they were human use. And so when the museum, he got a hold of my papers about that from the museum somehow. I guess any papers I would turn in if I gave in bows and arrows, they would alert people who did bows and arrows, hey, we got another paper on bows and arrows, in case you want to add that to your studies. So Urs Farmer got a hold of the notes I'd made on the sapo, and then got in touch and said, get me some of this. Get me a frog. Here's some money. And he really was very careful about going through the notes, and he wrote a real good paper in Toxicon in 92, I think it published, saying, and he miscalled me an anthropologist because I'm an amateur anthropologist, not a real anthropologist. He said, anthropologist Peter Gorman went down and worked with the Mayaruna Matsés with this sapo medicine that we worked with in the past. He claims it did this, and it's used these ways. Let's see if we can find out, is that possible? What Gorman is saying could be attributed to the peptides and, the stuff that's in this medicine, or was it due to something else? Or did Gorman just make up this nonsense? And interestingly, pretty much everything, except he couldn't explain that I said I had the feeling of like animals going through me. He said, well, that probably sounds like literary license. But everything else, Gorman is saying, used for abortive, yes, that would certainly be an abortive. To make you want to vomit, yes, that would, this would do that. Your blood pulsing, yes, it would do that. Drop in blood pressure, yes, it would do that. I mean, I think it's a marvelous medicine. I'm a little skittish about how it's being used by some people right now.
Yeah, it seems like there are now kind of a bit of an explosion of Kambô facilitators. The indigenous tribes that I've spent time with in Brazil, there's a whole dieta process to really get to know and learn about the medicine before you actually administer for other people. So I see these Western facilitators, they're not going down into the jungle to meet the frog and do the dieta, but they might get some certification. I think there's an organization called the International Association of Kambô Facilitators or something that can't remember exactly. I'll look it up and I'll include that link to the organization with the show notes for this interview. But yeah, and then even recently too, an individual died in Florida at the Soul Quest Ayahuasca Church, and it's believed that he died when Kambô was being administered to him. So I'm curious to know, are there any risks to using Kambô? And if so, what they are? Would it be like an admixture type of risk, or would it be a poor facilitation, a poor administration type of risk?
You have to add Peter Gorman to the list of people who teach facilitators. I probably have taught 8 or 10 people in the last year, just so it's full disclosure. Usually they're people who've got quite a lot of experience, and they're already serving other people, and I would prefer them to actually know what the problems they're going to face are, rather than do it and be stupid about it. And I think I know enough to be able to do that and steer them in the right direction. And I also give them so much freaking medicine over the course of our 10 days together, and they serve 20 or 30 people under my supervision during the same period, the last 2 days. And they get to serve me, so I have to suffer through their mistakes as well for 3 days. So just so you know, I'm adding the list with the bums who are teaching this. There are tons of risks. I had a woman, one of the most horrible was a woman came up to me recently, a couple of months ago. I was in Iquitos at my office at a restaurant on the boulevard. Just called my office, just a table I take over for half the day. And sat down, Peter Gorman, and said, oh, she had agony on her face. And I said, what's up? Turned out she was cramping, just tough cramping. It was been cramping for a night. And I said, well, what brought that on? It's your period or whatever. Is there anything I can do for you? I've got some ibuprofen, if that'll help. I said, no. I'm pregnant. And I took sapo yesterday, kambo, because the guy told me it's going to strengthen my umbilical cord. I wanted to fucking jump out of my freaking chair. Somebody had told her this would be good to strengthen her umbilical cord while she's pregnant. The truth was, lady, you're miscarriaging. An abortion with kambo is the most painful type of abortion you can have. You will slowly cramp for hours and hours and hours. And I don't care if the zygote is less than the size of a frickin' peanut. You're going to cramp in such a way that you don't want to be around it. And I've seen it, and I don't like it. And this idiot was telling her this is good for your umbilical cord. And he's causing her a miscarriage. So there's a lot of bad information out there. And I guess the person, I never did meet him, but I was told the person justified it by saying, well, Peter Gorman says that the Matsés administer it to the women during pregnancy to find out if the baby's going to, if it's going to turn out to be a human baby and if it's going to be healthy or not, and whether to choose to abort. And I felt like committing suicide because this guy's thinking you just administer. It's like what the Matsés would give a woman who's pregnant to find out if the fetus is viable would be such a minuscule amount, just enough to make her pee so they could look at the pee and see whether there's blood in it, whether it's cloudy, whether it's clear, to determine if it's male or female, if it's healthy or not healthy. You know, the way midwifery is done. It's not like you just pop these women with, give them a bunch of sapo and, wish them good luck. They'd all be aborting all over the place. So I think on the one hand, people do need to be training people. For instance, not everybody does this, but I would say maybe 1 out of 5 people who do sapo or kambo. I don't have enough experience with the kambo version. With sapo version, 1 out of 5 people are going to stand up to say, I'm going to go to the bathroom, and they're going to fall down before they get to the bathroom. They're just going to black out. They're liable to hit their head on something or split their head open. Now you got a very scary situation where you have a panicked person, terrified, seeing blood all over the place. I mean, that's not a direct result of the sapo being dangerous. It's just, a sidecar to it. You have people who black out and their heads get in an awkward position, and then they vomit, and they'll choke on their vomit. That is a dangerous situation. In terms of the medicine itself, if someone is pregnant, if someone is breastfeeding, I don't like the idea of serving it to anybody who's breastfeeding because if you're going to eliminate toxins, the toxins are going to be stored until they can be eliminated in soft tissue. The soft tissue, breast is one of the places. And so will the toxins end up in the milk for the lactation or will the medicine itself end up, in that infant? Either one I don't think would be a good thing for the infant. So I think some of these things are what you just kind of consider no-brainer, typical danger, just avoid it,
What about like high, low blood pressure or any type of health considerations or drug contraindications?
The thing is this, almost lots of the ingredients, the key ingredients, the primary ingredients in sapo are all bioactive. It means they interact with your body as if your body made them. They unlock the receptor sites because they fit perfectly into them like a key into a lock, and unlock the receptor sites. When the receptor site has enough of a chemical that your own body makes, it just simply shuts down when it's had enough. If you're a runner, you start to feel pain, well, you're going to start to give off, endorphins to be able to get through the pain. When your muscles say, I don't care how much more endorphins you give me, I'm about to rip apart, then your body's going to start producing lactate acid, right? And that's going to simply shut down the endorphins and shut down the muscles. You're not walking another step. That's it. We're done. But it all works perfectly because it's your body's manufacturing these chemicals as it needs them. So the receptor sites open and close. The same applies to, for some odd reason, the material in sapo kambo, if properly collected. If properly collected. That's a big question because so much demand now there are people selling lots of adulterated products out there. I've come across egg yolk. I've come across candle wax. Egg yolk could probably kill somebody. Egg yolks are very dangerous with the bacteria. And if you got egg yolk that's been sitting in the sun in Berlin or, for a month, I mean, they're a hotbed of bacteria. Take that and let's just put that in an open wound in your body. I don't know that it wouldn't be horrible for you. I think it'd be very dangerous for you. And yet, if you tell somebody who doesn't have a lot of money, hey, I'll give you $100 if you give me this, they're going to get you something. It's very difficult for that person to say, no, I don't really know how to collect. I don't know what the frog is. I'll pick any frog. Who cares? So other dangers, some of the dangers from adulteration, some of the dangers from physical response or being in the wrong position, when you are going to vomit or you need to go to the bathroom and you black out. But the frog itself is going to lower blood pressure because it's a vasodilator. And when it dilates the vessels, of course, it's going to open them up like a dried balloon. And that's going to cause some of the plaque to, be eliminated into the bloodstream and then, kicked out of the body, which is going to produce more oxygen for your organs, which is going to make your organs stronger for a long, long period of time, and to operate at a higher caliber, but there's a little more oxygen, a little more blood getting to them, has a little more oxygen. So on that count, there really should not be any issue because it's all bioactive material. If someone had a very low blood pressure and they're not taking their pills, then you would say, well, no. I mean, it might lower worse. I mean, I can imagine something bad could happen. But if someone had low blood pressure, but they're taking their pills, and so they're out walking around with 120 over 80 or something along that effect, so if this drops them down to 100 over 60 for 5 minutes, that's still okay range. If they said, I'm not taking my pills, I'm already at 70 over 40. Now I'm saying, I'm serving you. I'm not serving you anyway, because I don't want you to go down to 30 over 10 and die. That'd be silly, When you serve somebody who gets seizures, it can be dangerous. Just if you don't know what you're doing, and if you don't know how to ask, if you think there might be, I don't like to serve people who are taking time release medicines. Not because the sapo is bad, but what if the sapo, like Little Miss Pac-Man running around your body eliminating toxins, eating them up and spitting them in your bloodstream, what if that released your time release all at once? That would be a bad thing. If you're supposed to get this medicine over 24 hours, and instead you get a flush of it in a 5-minute period, I don't know. I suspect that could be a dangerous thing. So I won't serve people if in using time release. I don't serve people.
Oh, continue.
I don't serve people with chemotherapy. If between chemotherapies, I think it's a good help for the body. But while they're on chemotherapy, again, this is one of those. No, you're using that medicine. You have faith in that medicine. Have faith in that medicine. Doesn't matter what I think about chemotherapy. You think it's good enough to use. You think it's saving your life. Trust it. Don't try to sabotage it by using something else, which is going to behave in a very different way in your body.
What about the number of points that you receive? Is there a certain number where it's just too much and you'll get an overdose?
You just totally freak out. I've never known anyone using the sapo method to take more than 10. I've only known one person in my life who ever took 10. I only know one person who ever took 9. That's me. I only knew 2 or 3 people who took 7. That was me and me. 4 is obscene. 3 puts the biggest, toughest guy in the world on his hands and knees begging for mercy. I mean, we use good-sized tamashi. It's a good deep burn. With Kambô, I hear people doing 12 points, 14 points, 20 points. They're much smaller points, number one. I don't know, but I've spoken to people who do it, and they seem to tell me 6 or 8 is plenty. So doing 24 might be the equivalent of doing 10 It's just a show-off number to say you did it once, and then you blacked out, and 2 minutes after you put it on, they're wiping it off and pouring water over your head to cool you down, you know. But would you die from it? Not in theory, because it's bioactive. Your body would just shut down. It's not enough.
What is the difference between sapo and kambo? Because aren't they both the same name? They're different names for the same frog secretion from the Phyllomedusa bicolor tree frog.
Yes. But I think in the application they're slightly different.
Okay.
In my experience, and this is not, I don't have experience with the indigenous with this, but in my experience up here in North America or even in Peru with people who do kambo, they generally drink liquid beforehand to help induce vomiting when they take the medicine. And most frequently, the medicine is liquefied using water, whereas with the Matsés, you don't specifically drink anything. You don't fast, you don't not fast, you just don't do anything. It's like time to do sapo, just do it. If you just ate a meal, do it. If you didn't eat a meal, do it. You know, if you have water in your system, do it. If you didn't, I mean, that's not a consideration with sapo. You know, when did you last eat? Who cares? Because you're probably not going to throw up unless you just ate. But throwing up is not the purpose of doing it with you do it sapo style. And you also use saliva rather than water when you do sapo style. 2 reasons. One, the enzymes in the saliva help break down, you know, activate the peptides very quickly so that they're active before they're even going to your bloodstream. Okay? So it's a fast, hard response. 2, if I'm serving you, I'm giving you my spirit through my saliva. Same way when I blow the nunu or the rapé up your nose. Anybody could blow the medicine up your nose, but it won't nearly be as powerful as if a good hunter blows it up your nose. If someone with a degree of integrity and, you know, some personal power, whoever that might be, forget me, just somebody, when Pablo serves me sapo, it's twice as strong as if my kids serve me sapo. Same medicine, same cuts. It's twice as strong with Pablo because his saliva has his spirit, and his spirit is powerful, and that's immeasurable. So I think using water just is a little bit different. It's just different application. I think the focus on vomiting to cleanse your stomach, you know, and liver bile is a very different focus. I think with sapo, it's more a general tonic. So it's meant to like root out toxins anywhere they're stored all over your body. And, you know, the feathering on your heart, when some people get older, they start to have irregular heartbeats. It's just little goops that's on the, you know, on the valve that's keeping it from opening and closing properly. Well, let this little Miss Pac-Man run around and clean that right up and fix that heart right up. You know, if your memory's getting a little short, let her fix this up. She'll jump over the brain barrier and trim that right up. And I'm not saying she's going to cure Alzheimer's, but, you know, she'll get rid of some of that foggy stuff that we live with sometimes. You know, she'll open up your blood passage. She'll clean out your liver. She'll clean out your kidneys. You know, she'll give you extra oxygen in your lungs. And because it took you 10, 20 years to build up those toxins she's going to eliminate in a week or 3 or 4 sessions, you're going to be clean or a little bit cleaner for 10 years. So, I mean, you got a very long after effect with this, even though the acute effect might only be, you know, 15, 20 minutes.
So what inspires Westerners to seek out sapo or kambo treatments? Like, are there particular ailments that it can it be good for?
If you listen to some of the practitioners or go to the boards, I swear it's good for everything from making toenails shiny to making your lips look pretty. I don't know. I really don't know. There are certainly, if getting a little more oxygen through your blood, because you have your blood's, you know, a little vasodilation, a little cleaning out of the plaque, a little more blood, a little more oxygen, everything's going to get improved a little bit. To me, that's great. When people tell me specifically, oh, I got rid of a muscle disorder, or I had muscular dystrophy, and I haven't been out of a wheelchair in 12 years, and I did sapo twice, and now I'm running a marathon next week. I think I take those with a bit of a grain of salt. And I wish that would happen. I just haven't seen that. I see smaller stuff. I see improvement, temporary improvement in a lot of stuff. And I think once people have a glimpse of what improvement feels like, then they might have the urge to work towards that on a more permanent level, but they might still have to do the work to get there.
What about malaria? Can it cure malaria or heal it, improve it?
I don't know. I mean, I still get bouts with malaria. It's been now, since 85 I got it. So 33, 34 years later, and I still get it once, twice a year, just for a night, 2 nights. Those little bugs aren't going to leave my system, and I've done sapo hundreds, if not thousands of times. I mean, they're just living in my liver, my kidneys. These the malaria bugs. And when I get really, I forget to eat for a few days. I know it doesn't look it, but I do forget to eat a few days. I don't sleep for a few days. My, immune system depresses. And then next thing you know, my teeth are chattering in the middle of a Texas summer. I'm freezing. It's like, nuts, got malaria again. Damn it. But it'll go away. These days it's so old and my body's so used to it, it just is a day or two. So will it cure it? No, not as far as I know.
What does Western research know about sapo and its potential therapeutic benefits?
There are lots of companies working quietly on this. The plainest and most obvious places that people are working on there's a thing called dermorphin and a peptide called deltafin in sapo. And they are 17 and 33 times stronger than the best morphine we make. And they have advantage over morphine. One, they're bioactive, so there's no chance of you becoming addicted to either one of them, because your body just shuts down when it's had enough. And two, they don't put you to sleep. In other words, you're getting all this flooding of this painkiller while you're still awake on the sapo, so it wouldn't put you to sleep. So rather than having someone that you love dying on a morphine drip and essentially kind of in a morphine coma with such high levels of morphine in their system, that same person could be just using this if you could isolate it, or if you just gave them sapo. But I mean, medical field is thinking about turning it into a medicine. Give them this pill, and they'll just be up and walking around the last 2 weeks. Yes, they're dying, but they're not in pain. And, wouldn't it be nice to have your mom for the next couple of weeks rather than have her just lying in the bed dying? So I think painkillers are what's one of the things aimed for. The second one, I think, is the bradykinin in sapo Kambô, which is called phytokinin, or phylokinin because of the phylomedusa. Its version. This is a protein, a peptide, a short protein, that jumps the blood-brain barrier. Now, you got to imagine the blood-brain barrier is like a picket fence around your brain, and it prevents stuff like the cold or a cold from getting in there and killing you. Now, for us to access that brain, let's say to deal with your brain cancer, or to deal, knock on wood, I didn't mean your brain cancer, I mean in general, or to deal with someone with Alzheimer's, or some other condition of the brain, we generally have to break the blood-brain barrier open. Whether it's radiation treatment, whether it's cobalt treatment, you got to pick a fence, here it is, bang, you just blew it up. Okay, maybe you delivered the medicine that killed that cancer, but you now have a hole in the blood-brain barrier, and sooner or later, a common cold is going to walk through there and it's going to kill you. Do you know what I mean? You can't mess with that blood-brain barrier. So if a company, what's unique about the phylokinin in sapo nunu, in the phylomedusa bicolor, is that according to Ersparmer, it jumps the blood-brain barrier and has the capability of piggybacking other peptides with it and other proteins. So if you could piggyback things that would attack the Alzheimer's or the brain cancer and get that delivery system to the point where, you're being attacked without destroying the blood-brain barrier, this would be a breakthrough of breakthroughs. This would be, enormous. And I just say, not being a scientist, if I just say those three things, the two, the painkillers and the blood-brain barrier, those are the teaser. What the use of Phylomedusa bicolor by humans does is it begins to crack open the door to the study of all of the amphibian skins and all the thousands of peptides they have together. We needed somebody, or it needed to happen, that people like Ersparmer were already studying the peptides in this frog. He was also fascinated, but he couldn't try them on humans without a history of human use. You go to jail for that. So when my paper comes out, it happens to be the first, it just happens to be the first one out there, then now he can start using it on humans. Now he can imagine using it on humans. Now pharmaceutical houses can begin imagining using it on humans. And that opens the door for, well, what about these others? What about these frogs? What about these toads? What about, and the Phylomedusa bicolor might not in the end make a single medicine that Western medicine can utilize. But it might open the door to 3 or 4, knock on wood, I wish there would be good ones, good medicines that could help a lot of people. Although then you have to trust the pharmaceutical companies, and I'm not sure I'm willing to go that far.
Well, thank you so much for your time here, sharing your incredible stories. I feel like I could continue talking to you for much longer, but we need to end our session today. And I want to just end with an important question that comes up quite frequently, especially when I spend time with the indigenous tribes in Brazil, which is, this concern that they have around, Westerners engaging in biopiracy or, being able to offer their sacred medicines and charge a lot of money for it, and, that it's, they feel like they are being disrespected. Do you have any suggestion on how Western facilitators and those who receive these therapies that originated from the indigenous cultures, how we might be able to be in right relationship to the indigenous people and the cultures? I know it's not an easy question to answer. But we're not the expansion of these medicines around the world is a tide that is just has its own momentum, so it's happening. So, what can those of us who want to be in integrity with how these medicines are applied, what can we do?
Tough question. Personally, I have a couple of people who collect for me, collect a certain way, and they get $100 a stick. And then I also pay for the village funerals, the village weddings, the village parties. I mean, over the course of a year, a couple extra $1,000 gets in, so everybody gets a little something. All that just justifies me personally. In terms of a pharmaceutical house ending up making a medicine, for instance, there are legal people in place that will, the first time one of those gets to human use studies, those houses will be alerted that, by the way, since this all started with the Matsés, you're going to owe some money to some people because it's not yours. You didn't just invent this. It started with this journalist who wrote this story, and so you're going to have to get these indigenous people a cut of your pie. And that could be, I don't care how, I'm not the right person to say how much do the Matsés get versus how much does someone else get. I mean, what if someone else taught the Matsés, then the Matsés get all the money? I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of tribes that use
somebody else can work with that, But it's certainly, we know where it started. It started with that first piece of paper that I wrote and with the first story that I published on that. And that goes back to the Matsés. So there's a definite connection to indigenous. And if the Matsés also, you would talk about Kitakina and you talk about some of the others, then they got to get a piece. And that pharmaceutical house has to know in advance, oh, the lawyers are just waiting. Just get it ready and just be aware that you'll be paying a share. Because biopiracy, when you start making something that's going to turn into $14 billion industry a year, ain't happening. I mean, not if I can help it, it's not happening. And I think other people feel the same way. And I'm not the lawyer. I hope the people that are in place are pretty good, because I agree. This is certainly individually shouldn't get ripped off. The villages should be taken care of. You're going to charge $200 for a session here. I understand it might be 4 hours a day, 5 hours a day, but make sure that the people down there got paid. Not forget this cut rate. Hey man, I got the stick for $12. Cool. Is good egg yolk? No, man, it's wax, man. But it looks like frog sweat, right? I'd rather it be done properly. And I do my best for me to stay decent, But I also recognize, hey, but I don't serve very often, But most of it's free. Yeah, I think me and the Indians are all right.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your advice and stories and experience. How can people best stay in touch with you, Peter?
I've got a website. I think it's called pgorman.com.
All right. I'll put it below this video. I want to thank you so much, and you have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thanks very much, Lorna.
All right. Bye-bye.